Hello and a very warm welcome indeed to this latest edition of Quadriga, coming to you from the heart of the German capital, Berlin. And this week we're looking at those stunning revelations that have been coming out of Panama. Documents initially leaked to a German newspaper, the Süddeutsche Zeitung, giving unprecedented insights into how and where the world's rich and powerful stash their cash. As I said, Panama is the focus of the latest revelations, and one Panama-based company is at the heart of the scandal, Mossack Fonseca. It is called. It stands accused of offering tax evasion and money laundering facilities to tens of thousands of clients. They apparently include members of the global political elite, the rich and the super rich. There are sports stars too. And there are criminals, including arms traders, drug barons and terrorists. So on the show today, we're going to be discussing the question, the Panama Papers, how dirty is the hidden money? And to discuss that question, I'm joined in the studio by three excellent observers and analysts. I'd like to introduce them to you, beginning with Max Heywood from Transparency International, who says, we've heard too many empty promises before. Governments now have to take real action and make the ownership of all companies public. Also with us is Malte Lehming from Berlin's Tagesspiegel newspaper. Welcome, Malte. He agrees with Max. We need to know the real and proper name of the owners of every company in the world, says Malte. But that is easier said than done. Prominent business journalist Ursula Weidenfeld points out that as long as it can't be proven that money from shell companies is being used for illegal purposes, we must presume that the people holding those accounts are innocent. Max Heywood, I'd like to begin with you if I can. I mentioned that you represent the Berlin-based organisation Transparency International. The name pretty much speaks for itself. It's your job to cast light into shady dealings. What have you learnt this past week that you didn't know before?
Well, what we've learned is, above all, the names of people who are attached to this, and it's given us a better idea of the size of the system. We had indications, for example, estimates of $7 trillion being stashed in these offshore places, but now it's given us a better peek at a small amount of what's actually hidden out there. And it's once again emphasized for us how much needs still to be done to actually crack down on this practice.
Yeah, when you say how much still needs to be done, I wonder whether it's going to make your work at Transparency International more easier or more difficult, because obviously the people who have got money to hide and secrets to hide, they're going to be working even harder to do so.
Well, what we hope is that the space for them is going to keep getting smaller and smaller. So this agenda has really moved forward a lot in the last 2 or 3 years. So no one was talking about this 3 or 4 years ago. And this week, it has really been a massive boost for the issue. There's a lot more public awareness now.
So you'd call it a breakthrough?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
OK. Malte Lehming, as the law-abiding and tax-paying citizen that I believe you to be, you never know. What's your reaction to what you've been hearing from Panama?
Actually, I mean, it's quite true. It hasn't been proved that there was illegal things been going on yet. So we just don't know that. We have a huge amount of information. It's 2.6 terabytes of information. That is really huge. I think it's a breakthrough too. It's not that we didn't know anything about it. We knew a lot about how shell bank accounts and companies work and where they're located and things like that. But sometimes it is like you already know a lot of things about it, but then comes something like this, the Panama Papers, and it really gives you a picture about what is going on. I think there may be something like the right of being anonymous in certain business experts, but on the other hand, there is a whole system of secret bank accounts, companies that brings more damage to the whole world than would be done if we just skip the right of being anonymous.
I'm interested what you would have to say about that, Ursula. This right to privacy, the right to be anonymous, as Malte puts it. I've got a quote from Mossack Fonseca there, sort of an interesting line of defence. They've come out and said, privacy is a fundamental human right that's being eroded more and more in the modern world. They're setting themselves up almost as a kind of a human rights organisation. But that's quite close to the quote we had from you at the beginning of the show. So where do you stand on all this?
Well, I think I agree totally to you. When it comes to criminal things, privacy is not a good which should be defended. But on the other hand, we don't know whether it had been criminal things within there. We just assume that there has been criminality, money laundering and things like that, but we don't know anything about criminal things going on. And as long as we don't know it, everybody has the presumption of being innocent. And that seems to me to be a very high good, which should be defended at all times. We live in highly developed countries, and even the US seems to be a tax haven when it comes to Delaware, or British England is one when it comes to the British Virgin Islands. So as long as we don't know that there have been criminal things within there, we shouldn't be quick in judging all the shell companies as being not legal, as being not as being not legal.
Okay. No, absolutely. I think in the individual cases, absolutely, there's a presumption of innocence, and the authorities will decide once they get the information. I can reasonably be confident in saying that there will be cases where criminal activity will be found. Given on the data that we've seen, you know, it seems that it's undoubtedly there will be cases found where it's confirmed by courts, but let's see what the courts say. Our main argument here is about the system. You know, this international global system, of which this case is just a small example. As you say, there are many other jurisdictions, absolutely Delaware. But, you know, the argument that everyone else is doing it doesn't make it better, right?
But is that an argument against shell companies, or is it an argument against the international community, which isn't able or willing to go for criminal things, to go for money laundering, to go for terrorism and things like that?
Both. The international community should crack down on shell companies, and in fact they have committed to do that. In 2014, the G20 countries, the most powerful countries in the world, they committed. They said we have a 10-point plan and we are going to commit to transparent company ownership precisely to prevent these crimes. The implementation is what's been missing, precisely because of the political will, absolutely.
I may add to this. I think the system that you just described, I think there can't be any doubt that it makes tax evasion easier. It makes money laundering easier. It makes terror financing easier. It makes circumventing UN sanction systems easier. So there are clearly huge disadvantages of the system. What is the clear advantage of having shell companies and shell bank accounts that equals these clear disadvantages?
Well, I think it is the nature of money to be anonymous. That is the nature of money. And if you...
Ursula, you say that. Please explain.
Well, that means if it comes to cash, if I give you 100 euros or $1,000, nobody knows where these $1,000 have been before, and nobody would know where they will go. Money is not a personal thing. It is just trust which is handled over from one hand to the other. So, and that is the nature of money. And if you say money which is traded within these circles you described, or money which is in shell companies, is illegal money,
I haven't said that.
I understood that.
No. The system is legal as it is now, but but that's the problem. That is just too legal.
Yeah.
I mean, we had.
It's too legal.
In former times, we would have said diplomacy is anonymous in nature, or telephone calls. Then we had the NSA scandal, the WikiLeaks, and things like this. In digital age, money is not anonymous. In the digital age, you can just follow the money and the track of the money if you have the tools, and if it's legal to track the money. To make it illegal, or to create a system that relies upon the anonymous nature of the money, that is the problem.
Well, if you have money which is earned in a proper way, and you paid your taxes, and you did everything the state or anyone could expect from you in terms of taxation and things like that, it is your right to do with the money what you want to, and not to be overseen in doing that. It's your right to...
What is the advantage for having a system that allows anonymous bank accounts? Why do people need it? What is the good reason?
Well, there are some reasons where you could, if you are in the international shipping business, you would need the shell companies to process the money to the ships and to the crews on the ships. If you are a wealthy person who has to manage the inheritance, you probably would go for something like that. If you are prominent and want to buy a fancy house or whatever, you probably would prefer to be not known by the seller. Or there are some reasons not to be, but I think.
Can I give you a statistic? So our colleagues in the UK, they looked at the London Property Registry. You mentioned houses, and they crossed it against corruption cases, and they found over 70% of corruption cases where money went into real estate was through shell companies. And we find this again and again, that these anonymous structures are used to enable this kind of money laundering and corrupt money. Because the issue is that when the ownership is anonymous, it's very hard it's impossible to tell the difference between what's legal and what's illegal, precisely because it's secret. So the assumption that is made that this is legal, which by the way is an interesting defense. The best defense that I've heard so far from quarters defending this kind of practice is that it's legal. If that's the best argument you can do, this is not really a defensible practice, in my view.
OK. We'll come back to that line of thought in just a second. There are a lot of questions, clearly, in the past week or so have been asked in the media about what's going on in Panama. Another question is, what do ordinary people think? We've got an idea, certainly from Iceland, where people have been protesting. They've been showing their anger, and the Icelandic leader has had to step down.
The Icelandic Prime Minister taken by surprise.
Mr. Prime Minister, what can you tell me about a company called Vintris?
Well, it's a company, if I recall correctly, which is associated with one of the companies that I was on a board of, and had an account, which, as I mentioned, has been with the tax on the tax account since it was established. So now I'm starting to feel a bit strange about these questions, because it's like you are accusing me of something.
An Icelandic colleague who had evaluated the Panama Papers joined the discussion, but the two journalists didn't get much further. Gunnlaugsson broke off the interview. Angry protesters hit the streets in Iceland. The political backlash has been severe. And with other politicians in the Panama Papers, Gunnlaugsson won't be the only one affected.
Max Heywood, a lot of ordinary people out on the streets there in Iceland. We've seen the same kind of thing happening in Argentina and other countries as well. I'd just like to introduce a quote to the discussion from Georg Maskalo. He's a German journalist who's been leading the Panama probe, or one of the people who've been leading the probe. And he said, no, not one single scandal in recent years where there has not been one single scandal in recent years where there's been no connection to the Panama Papers. Do you expect there to be more public anger, more public wrath about what we're seeing and hearing, or is there going to be one great big international shrug where people are going to say that's what they do, isn't it?
Well, that's one of the big changes we're seeing this week, because these problems have been known among the people that work on these issues. So financial journalists, you know, people who actually... This has been a turning point in terms of exactly that. People realizing and joining the dots between the problems they're having at home, you know, the lack of infrastructure, etc., you know, the corruption in their countries, and these obscure shell companies offshore. The dots have been joined in a dramatic way. So public anger is going to continue, hopefully, unless leaders take action immediately, which is what they should be doing.
Talking of leaders taking action, political journalist Malte Lehming, the German finance minister Wolfgang Schäuble came out earlier this week and said, the revelations are not entirely surprising. It doesn't sound as though he's going to lead the charge to change the status quo.
No, they aren't entirely surprising, but it is like when I think the book about the Archipel Gulag from Alexander Solzhenitsyn came out in '74. Everything was known to that time about Soviet brutality, Soviet systems, about Siberia, about the slave labor camps, and so on and so on. But the book itself just brought so many documents and named people and so on and so on. It changed a lot. It changed the whole atmosphere in the West towards the Soviet Union, towards communism. It makes it much more harder for defenders of communism to defend this. So it makes now much more harder for a defender of the secret money global system to defend it as soon as you see what is done with this money.
Well, I'm not so sure whether we are at a real turning point right now. We have had Swiss leaks, we have had Lux leaks. Now we have a bigger leak, and
Much bigger.
And that is a difference, and it really makes a difference. But when it comes to the question whether we are at a turning point or not, if you think about the willing of the international community to take action, I'm not so sure whether they will go for it, because we have tax havens in nearly all developed countries. We do have agreements like the OECD agreement, and nothing did work properly. And on the other hand, we are at a real turning point when it comes to the question of freedom or more security, more people looking at money accounts, at bank accounts, and that is a real turning period we are in.
It is a turning point, I would say, just because the public now knows that keeping secrets is so much more difficult than it used to be. As I said before, with WikiLeaks and the Snowden papers and now the Panama Papers, in very, very short time limits, we see that it's almost impossible to keep secrets really secret in the digital age. And I think that's a turning point the Panama Papers really contribute to as well.
I wonder, I mean, you talk about keeping secrets and about the attitude that the public have and how these things are explained to them. Because, I mean, I'd like to just talk, Max, about the role of the German banks in this. The Süddeutsche Zeitung, the newspaper at the heart of this story, reported this week, and it's the figures are staggering. 28 German banks used Mossack Fonseca's services. At least 14 banks set up a total of more than 1,200 shell companies. That doesn't sound like people are beginning to cotton on to the fact that this is not in the realm of legality.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that quote shows is the scale of this system. So you have the largest banks in the world, you have leading law firms, not just in Panama, but all over the world, offering these services. And until a few years ago, or even now, there are circles in which this is perfectly acceptable. It's seen as a question of individual rights, where an individual has, the right...
It is a question of individual rights.
The question is that the balance has to be balanced with the social good. And that is where I think the key of the discussion here is around social interest and the interest of the global community as a whole, and the interest of citizens who are having to pay more tax because wealthy people are avoiding their tax, and corruption, which also affects ordinary citizens, all of which is being facilitated by this system. And that, I think, is what's interesting about the discussion, which is being driven. The talking points that we're hearing from this industry are always about privacy and individual rights, and completely ignoring the social costs of their activities.
Well, I agree with you that we do have to find the balance between individual freedom and the interest of the commons and the social interest. But but when it comes to individual rights, you have the right, and you should defend the right of your own money when it is taxed and when it is legally earned, to do with this money what you want to do. And that is the core of social market, of market economies, and even of social market economies. And if you begin to take that away, you will shrink competition. You will minimize competition within the societies, but even between societies, and that in the end would make the economy slower. It would demolish growth, and it wouldn't lead to growth and to more wealth of societies.
Okay, let's move on. Yeah, the whole question about whether people are behaving legitimately, illegitimately, legally, or illegally in putting their cash or whatever their assets in shell companies. That's that's an open discussion, I suppose you'd have to say. One thing we do know is that people who have been doing this in Panama have been keeping very bad company. Here's like a rogues gallery.
Funding for the Assads. Civil war has been raging in Syria for 5 years now, and Bashar al-Assad has made headlines using barrel bombs against his own people. The Syrian leader isn't in the Panama Papers, but his cousin is. Rami Makhlouf is one of the most powerful businessmen in the country. Has the war been partially financed through Panamanian accounts? And Mossack Fonseca had other dubious customers. Cash for weapons. John Bradenkamp has also made an appearance in the papers. Over the years, he's been an associate of Robert Mugabe, a dictator who's used terror and torture to enforce his will and has driven Zimbabwe to the edge of economic ruin. A UN report also says Bradenkamp played a key role in supplying arms to the war-torn Democratic Republic of Congo in the 1990s. Money for the drug trade. Rafael Caro Quintero was once one of Mexico's most powerful drug barons. Released in 2013 after decades behind bars, he's now once again a wanted man. And he's in the Panama Papers. If they serve this kind of clientele, shouldn't tax havens be banned completely?
I suppose that is indeed the question, Ursula. I'd just like to go back to where we were. My personal concern is that when you see the practices of the people we've just been seeing in that short clip, it leads to a huge erosion of trust in society, in the economy. And if societies and economies don't have trust to oil them, they don't work.
You're completely right, and I think nobody would defend criminal things, even not if presidents or whoever, high politicians are involved.
But if I have the sense that my taxes, that my local tax authorities know everything about my financial standing, right down to the last euro and cent, but they don't know about the other guys, then I'm going to start cheating too.
I'm not so sure. I think if you look at developed countries, most people pay their taxes properly and most people behave correctly. We do have some people who don't, and probably in some parts of the earth there are more than in Europe or wherever. But when it comes to tax havens, what is a tax haven? It is nothing. It is only the difference between a high tax country and a low tax country. And from the perspective of a high tax country, you would say, well, this is a tax haven there, and people who try to bring their money to the low tax country are.
OK, point taken. We're running out of time. Max, quickly.
I have to jump in there. Yeah. The big thing, we call tax havens secrecy jurisdictions. This is the term we prefer because that is what they're offering. The key attraction of these jurisdictions is the secrecy. The tax benefits are nice to have, but the secrecy is what they're selling, and that's the problem.
So competition is a good thing, and even tax competition is legal, and it's OK.
Do you mean tax competition between countries? Absolutely not. I don't think nation-states should be competing based on tax. There's very little evidence that lower tax rates leads to greater investment. Since I have 30 seconds, perhaps, greater investment comes from better roads, better education, highly qualified task forces, all of which are paid for by tax. So I would argue that tax is the price of civilization. You may know that quote. I think it was a US Supreme Court justice, and that would be my final point on that. OK,
I'd love to hear more from you both, but we are running out of time. I still would like to give sort of more or less the last word to you, Max. You're an expert here. You're from Transparency International, after all. Everybody's calling for what's being called by many people a global transparency initiative. Now, you do have 30 seconds to tell me what that could be like and whether it's going to happen.
That would be essentially every country should have a national public registry of who owns companies, simply knowing the ultimate owner of every company, and that should be aggregated into a global register where it would only allow people to find who is the owner of every company. It's a simple technical fix. Now governments have to do it.
And is it going to happen?
Yes, it will. It's a question of time.
Question of time. What time span are we talking about? The next year or two or the next 20 years?
10 years from now, this will be like smoking on aeroplanes. 20 years ago, it was normal to smoke on aeroplanes. It'll be the same.
Good thought. What's the moral of the story that we've been talking about today, Malte?
The moral, I think you have to make a judgment. You have to make the judgment between keeping the right of privacy, and that is for the benefit of the rich and super rich to keep the money sealed from the public to buy properties or big ships, which is a right, I agree, and to keep a system alive and in functioning, which makes it easier to tax evasion, terrorist financing, money laundering. And this is a judgment you have to make. And I think it's very obvious what kind of judgment you have to make.
Ursula.
Well, I do respect that there is a wish for more transparency, and I accept that. But I think it would be more. It is more important to go for the real criminal things, organized criminalization, and that would be the most important thing at all.
Thanks.
The days of secrecy are counted. It's very clear.
OK, I think we'll leave it there. Thanks very much indeed for joining us here on this latest edition of Quadriga. I hope we've given you plenty of food for thought. If we have, get in touch with us by mail, on the social media, and do join us next week here on Quadriga. It's been a great pleasure. Thanks very much for now. Bye-bye.